Okay, John, Britton, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we can get started off, John. Tell us a little bit more about your work out there in Utah, and what grade levels and what sort of projects that you were involved that had Follett nominate you for this award.
Yeah, I am but a humble sixth grade school teacher. I teach in an elementary school, so it's all subjects with the same group of kids all day. And toward the end of my first year of teaching, I had this moment where I realized that I'd been doing it all wrong. All year long, I'd had my kids working really hard, getting ready for those end of year tests. And then there was a news story about kids in Korea who had drowned on a ferry boat. And it was a really tragic story, and it was a needless tragedy. Those kids should have been able to use their voices and their reasoning skills to get off of that boat, like the captain and the crew, but they didn't. They were told to stay in their cabins, and so they did. And as a first year teacher working with children, for some reason that story just really just got to me. It struck a nerve. And so for the last month or so of school, I decided, you know what, I'm going to make student empowerment the objective of every lesson. I'm going to make this the focus of everything I do with my kids. So I started asking them, what do you guys want to do? Huh? And they're like, we want to make a music video. I said, cool. What do you want to make a music video about? And they said, story problems. I said, oh my God, you guys are such nerds. All right, let's do that. What song do you want to do? And they chose a One Direction song. And in my mind, I said, no. But again, this was all about them. And I said, cool, let's do it. And that became the first of what has now been a long series of what I like to call digital passion projects. Projects where my kids say, this is what we care about. This is how we want to express it. This is how we want to share information and educate others on this topic. And my job as their teacher is purely to coach them through the process, to facilitate in whatever way they need me to, and then provide a platform at the end for them to share. For that first music video, I posted on YouTube. We created a class YouTube channel. And since then, my students have created music videos, short films, documentaries, little podcast episodes that they've been able to put out there using our class's name, Ninth Evermore, to try to advocate for the causes that they care about most, and be champions for themselves, their families, and their communities.
That's great stuff. And Britton, how did you come upon John and John's work to where you felt his Follett should be inspired to nominate this? I mean, what makes his kind of work distinctive or worthy of being celebrated?
Our paths, I think, initially crossed when we held a customer facing webinar, and
Mhm.
we had such great response to that webinar. We invited John back to do a lunch and learn, which was an internal event. During the pandemic, I started to do lunch and learns to kind of keep the team connected, even though many folks were working remotely. Just kind of updating the team on what was going on in the organization. And so every now and then we try to have our customers be the center of those lunch and learns, so our team can understand what's happening out in the real world in the classrooms. And so because John's story was so compelling in that first webinar, we invited him to speak to our team. And I can't tell you the feedback that we got associated with John's story in both of those settings was, people were extremely moved to tears in some cases, because he has worked so hard to give students who need a voice. And that evolved actually into John speaking at our owners, Francisco Partners, held a edtech event. And a number of companies you'd probably recognize: Discovery Education, Renaissance, all of them, the leaders from those businesses were at this event. And so we asked John to be the dinner speaker and again share his story to those organizations. And I think that's evolved into other work that John has done with some of the Francisco Partner portfolio companies. So, I think his story resonates with many different folks, whether, you're serving the education industry, whether you're in the education industry as a fellow educator. Me personally, his story is a bit of a passion project, because my first act in life, I was a television reporter. And it's extremely important for me to give folks who may not have a voice. And John has taken that to life in a classroom setting. I would have loved to have the opportunity to make and produce videos, at that age. It took me going to college and, making many mistakes on live television before conquering it. So just really appreciate everything John has done to give students who need a voice.
And John, I'll say, I mean, with all the various upheavals over the past 2 or 3 years in both society as well as education, in terms of students, sixth graders have been right in the thick of it, right? I mean, so they were third graders through sixth graders.
Right.
We always used to talk about digital natives and their use of technology. And you can go from one newspaper headline that says, way too much screen time for kids has caused mental health problems. You can talk about platforms that should be restricted for students in order to their communications, which from my opinion, there are some valid concerns when it comes to those things. But then on the other hand, the amount of content that has been created and the way that the students are using these platforms are, Britton, as you were saying, just light years ahead of what we were doing at their age and the things that they can do. Talk to us about being in that center point and watching that, and where your point of view comes from on the, taking these platforms and restricting them versus the encouragement of their use.
Yeah, it's a tricky question. Since I started teaching, I've had this idea that I wanted my students to go from being content consumers to creators, right? I wanted them to go from being kids in the classroom to creators at work, right? And to look at our classroom as this workshop where they are creating original content that they are then able to put out into the world. But the world is a scary place, and the access point to the world, to a broader audience, the internet, is sometimes terrifying. And especially right now when things are so politically and socially fraught in our society, it's very it would be almost unreasonable not to be worried about either bringing in things from outside or putting student work out there, because there's a vulnerability to it. But at the end of the day, this is the work that has to happen. We have to figure out how best to put our students out there, because out there is where the action is. People need to hear from our young people. Last year we were watching a news story in my classroom about how this is the most depressed generation in history. And my students were sitting there. We eat breakfast in the classroom because it's a Title I school, and we're watching the news, and they just see one piece of evidence put out there after another about how kids are being just warped by social media, and they're seeing rates of suicidal ideation and self-harm at levels that they've never seen before. And when the news story was done, one of my students pointed out, you guys notice how there wasn't a single kid on that story? and it was true. We went back, we watched, it was all adults sharing their perspective about what was wrong with our kids. And my students said, that's messed up. How come no one's asking us what we need in order to be healthier? Why it is that right now, I mean, given the fact that we just survived a pandemic and all the other things that are going on, we might be a little sad. And so my students made a music video about it. They wrote answers to questions I would put on the board. Things like, what do you want to tell every adult? And what do you want people to know about what you're going through? And what is it that you need? And then they put it together in this product that they were able to put out there. And I had folks, including like the First Lady of Utah, Abby Cox, and others, coming and saying, this is exactly what we need to hear. And they're right. It's necessary. We have to hear from our kids. So we as adults have to figure out how to make their access points to broader audiences like the internet, whether it's podcasts or online video sharing platforms, whatever. We have to figure out ways to help them enter those spaces safely, because if all we do is shelter them from it and they never build the skill set and the knowledge of how to do this kind of work safely and responsibly, then they become adults who just rampage into the online digital landscape without the benefits of having an adult guide them into that space and show them how they can be both productive and safe. There are too many people out there operating online who didn't have the benefit of learning how to do it right in school. And so now we have to recognize that that has been a failing of our systems and do better by our children.
Britton, let me ask you a question of scaling. I mean, the inspired words of John and the work that he's doing. How do we clone him? I mean, how do we get this inspiration out there at a district-wide level or even at a national level? I mean, beyond just what we're doing right now, which is sharing his stories, but in the work that you do, I mean, I'm assuming that that's certainly an effort that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime we stumble upon a John in the industry, we try to tell the story over and over. We're blessed to have customers in nearly every school in the country. And so if we can share John's story and share why it's scalable, John uses a lot of tools that are readily available, in some cases free, in other cases low cost. It's just taking the tools that are out there and applying them to what students need in this environment. And so what I think is special about John's success is that he took things that any of us could and do use on a daily basis and applied it to give the students an important voice. And, I think it just kind of takes thinking about your curriculum a little bit differently. And being willing to let students make mistakes as well. I remember, I think early on, I asked John, okay, what editing software are you using? What production, what kind of camera are you using? And I mean, it's basic.
Yep.
It's an iPhone and some GarageBand and, again, all the things that all of us carry in our pockets. He's, making memories for these students and giving them a voice.
And John, I mean, along those lines, what are the recommendations you have for our listeners and our readers who have been inspired by your work and they see your work? And I know when they're reading this online at eSchool, they're going to have links to your stuff to see what's happening. What are your recommendations to them for first steps in terms of making that sort of cultural change to where their students stop being consumers and start being creators?
First thing is talk to your administrators and talk to your students' parents, build trust, make sure everything's out there and on the level, because nothing that I do with my students is scary, but it sure can seem scary if all you're doing is imagining what's going on in the classroom. The other thing that I would say is just recognize that all of the tools, just like Britton said, that we use in my classroom are the things that people are walking around with every day. There's free online software that allows you to create any of the projects that my students do. And frankly, all we're doing is what people do on Instagram every single day, YouTube, TikTok. My kids are now coming into class with a background knowledge on using this technology that 10 years ago, my kids had no idea about. And in 5 years, I imagine my kids are going to be coming in teaching me how to use everything and catching me up on this technology that's just ramping at such a high rate. The other thing that I would mention is, I love being on here with Britton because, like she said, we were brought together as professionals, as teacher and CEO in a very professional way, but we're all just humans. We're all just people, and we're all people who've survived a really hard time. The pandemic, people like to think it was so long ago, but it was just the other day. And throughout it really humanized all of us. And so for anybody who's listening, who's the leader of an edtech company or who participates in that space, and those of you listening who are school teachers like me, recognize that there are people out there who want to help you. I've had a really blessed experience with Follett because my students, I really wanted to implement book clubs in my classroom, and I had no idea how to do it. And I was able to speak with friends at Follett, and they were able to support my students by helping us get books, and also providing my students an opportunity to work as content creators and in creating these videos that were promoting books that they'd read during our book clubs last year, and putting it out there in the world. Not just that they care about social causes and championing their communities, but they love books, and they got to make videos about why they love particular books and why you should love their book over everybody else's book. And my students this year in my class have been watching that kind of content that my kids created last year, and have been asking, oh my gosh, one, can I read that book? Two, when do we get to do things like that? And every kid out there in school is asking that question. When do we get to do things like that? Anytime I talk to teachers or show the things that my students are doing, they tell me that their kids are yearning for experiences and opportunities like that. And our kids are already content creators. It's just that the content they create is not what they want to be creating. They don't want to be creating 5-paragraph essays or, short responses to this prompt. They want to be creating things that they would create on their own time outside of school. And once we bring opportunities into our classrooms for them to get excited and create the things that they want to create around the content that we need them to learn as sixth grade students in my case, then you're marrying two worlds that are just meant to be together. Our world is too small now to have the classroom isolated from real life. It's time for kids to learn in school the things that will make them successful outside of school. That's always been the stated goal, but now we have to appreciate that our kids are coming to school wanting to be influencers, YouTubers, and content creators. And the best place for them to learn how to do that is in the classroom.
Well, now we have ChatGPT to take care of the 5-paragraph essays, right? They don't have to worry about those anymore.
Goodness, right? Yeah.
So that leaves them open to some of these more creative pursuits. That's a whole other conversation that we can have at another time. But let me finish up by asking you, what are the things when you look out over the next 3 to 5 years that you're most excited about, either in technologies or the way you see your students' behavior thriving? I mean, what are the things that have you the most jazzed going forward when you look at the next school year and the next few school years out on the horizon?
That's such a tough question, because I think after our experiences the last several years, only a fool would make predictions about anything. I think that
how about
I'm
hopes?
most excited.
We'll say hopes.
Yeah, hopes. I get hope most from the fact that I've watched adults and young people demonstrate incredible flexibility and malleability. And so whatever is on the horizon, I know that we can handle it. And as far as where this work is going, I hope, and I honestly predict that more people, as the push towards things like personalized competency-based learning and all these other buzzwords that you hear in education, there's really a focus on awakening children to the brilliance that's inside of them and helping them meet individual goals around individual plans, and really letting what it is that drives them drive their education. And so as technology comes in, and as tools become more readily available, even more than they are right now, I think that the focus is going to be on helping kids continue to tailor their own educations and take greater ownership over their learning and their work products in school. And as teachers, there's this idea, you brought up ChatGPT, that at some point we're going to be replaced by AI, and kids are just going to learn on computer screens all day long. And I think anyone who says that has somehow forgotten how lonely it felt during the pandemic to be sitting on a computer screen all day long, trying your best to learn in a totally virtual and digital environment. The best parts about school are the human parts and the connections that you make. And there's nothing deeply connective about artificiality. And I'm predicting that as technology advances, somehow so too will our humanity, and we will continue to seek out vigorously opportunities to connect with each other and hopefully heal a lot of the divisions and the tension that we're feeling in our society. I think people are getting sick of it, and we're ready for something more positive and productive and overall better. And I know our kids are ready to lead us towards a better future in that way.
Well, John, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and your stories. I know, for our listeners, this is the type of stuff that really helps inspire them to do their work and to spread that sort of idea. And Britton, congratulations as well for recognizing John and being able to help put him out there so others can hear and read about the work he's doing. And I hope to continue to follow both of you and your continued success going forward.
Thank you, Kevin, and congratulations, John.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much.